They say the frontier can break a person or forge them into something fierce and full of fire. On a chill October afternoon in 1867, Clara Jacobs, a determined rancher's daughter, with eyes that refused to look away from anyone, rode out onto the plains to gather strays before dusk. What she found instead was a sight so terrible it stole her breath. A Lakota boy up to his chest in quicksand, crying out for help. In that single heartbeat, Clara's life changed forever, and in the months that followed, the entire region witnessed a miracle that no one would ever forget. The wide-open expanse of the Great Plains had long since ceased to amaze Clara Jacobs until that day. It was mid-October of 1867, and though the sky spread endless and bright, a chill in the wind reminded her that winter would soon gnaw at the tall grass. She rode her mare Maple with the confidence of a rancher's daughter who had learned to handle horses before she could properly walk. Her father, James Jacobs, known around the Dakota Territory as Old Jim, was a man of tough love and unflinching moral grit. He prided himself on honest labor and respect for the land. Clara had taken to ranch life easily, but her soul yearned for adventure beyond the daily chores. She often drifted off in daydreams, an unfortunate trait for someone who had to keep her eyes peeled for stray cattle. On that afternoon, she was scanning the horizon for the Jacobs brand on any wayward cow when Maple's ears perked the horse's instinct warning of something unusual. Clara patted the horse's neck gently, eyes narrowing at the faintest cry on the breeze. She slowed Maple to a halt. Straining to listen, her heart thudded. A distant voice, or was it an animal's distressed cry? She nudged Maple forward. Following the faint sound, Clara crested a small hill that overlooked a low, muddy patch near a drying stream bed. At first she saw nothing but churned-up mud and the colorless stalks of dying grass. Then movement frantic and desperate caught her eye. A young Lakota boy, perhaps only 10 or 11, was mired in thick, sucking mud, his arms flailed, eyes wide and terrified. Quicksand was not uncommon along these shallow riverbeds, and once trapped, a person could sink beyond help in minutes. The boy's hair was braided, his skin slick with mud, and the panic on his face cut through Clara as sharply as any blade. She had heard stories told around the ranch about local tribes, Lakota, Dakota, Nakota, and the uneasy tension that often simmered between them and the new settlers. Old Jim had told her 1,000 times to respect everyone, especially those who shared these plains. Even so, the unwritten law among many settlers was to keep your distance unless necessary. But looking at the terror in that boy's eyes, Clara felt only one conviction: she had to help. Quickly she dismounted. Maple grabbed her lariat from the saddle and approached the edge of the quicksand. The boy was already chest-deep, his skinny arms shaking from the effort of holding on. Clara called out, her voice steady, though fear darted in her heart. "I'm here to help you. I won't let you sink." She wasn't sure if he understood English, but she hoped he could sense the urgency and compassion in her tone. She anchored her feet in firmer ground, praying it would hold, then tossed one end of the rope toward him. "Grab it." He missed on the first try, mud pulling him deeper by the second. On the second throw, he clutched it, eyes wide with relief. Clara looped the other end around Maple's saddle horn, then slowly coaxed the horse backward, applying steady tension so as not to yank the boy violently. Inch by painstaking inch, the rope tightened, and Clara guided the boy, muddy and trembling, onto solid ground. He coughed and sputtered, the weight of shock making him unsteady. Clara hurried to his side, pulling a wool blanket from her saddle to wrap around him. She tried to speak in a soothing voice, words tumbling from her lips, in the only language she knew. "You're safe. I've got you. It's all right." For a moment, the boy studied her with dark eyes that seemed to hold the entire Great Plains in them. Then, without warning, he slumped forward, unconscious from the ordeal. Clara struggled to keep him upright. Adrenaline roared through her. She needed to do something, get him warm, bring him home, find some medicine. Home. It was risky, but she couldn't leave him out here. Gently, she hoisted his wiry frame onto Maple, climbed up behind, and rode for the Jacobs Ranch, determined to save a life, no matter what awaited her at home. Half an hour later, Clara's mare galloped across the Jacobs Ranch yard. The sun was now low, casting long shadows over the clappered house and the scattered outbuildings. Her father, old Jim, stood at the edge of the barn corral, deep in conversation with their ranch hand, an older man named Saul Peterson. Both men stiffened when they saw Clara with the unconscious Lakota boy draped in front of her. "What in tarnation?" old Jim muttered as Clara drew up the horse. He rushed over, brow furrowed. She slid down and carefully lowered the boy into her father's arms. "Pa, he was in quicksand. We've got to help him." Jim exchanged looks with Saul, who frowned but moved forward to assist. Inside, the modest ranch house was filled with the warmth of a crackling fire. Clara's younger sister Lucy, only 12, gasped as they brought the boy in. Immediately, Lucy fetched warm water while Clara hurried to gather blankets and rummaged for any of her mother's old remedies. Mrs. Jacobs Sarah had passed a few years earlier from influenza, leaving Clara to pick up many tasks of nurturing that a mother would typically handle. Old Jim set the boy on the couch, carefully peeling away the mud-caked clothes. "We'll do what we can," he said quietly. "But if the rest of his tribe finds out he's here," he let that warning hang in the air. Clara understood the unspoken worry. Tensions on the frontier could escalate over the smallest misunderstandings. But she pushed that fear away, too focused on saving the child's life. "Pa, we can't turn him away." "I know," Jim said, sighing. "One of our own doc's out of town for the week. Might have to send Saul to fetch Doc Hastings from Pine Creek, though that's half a day's ride. Let's see if he'll even make it through the night." They cleaned the boy, carefully sponging off the mud and wrapping him in fresh blankets. Lucy hovered nearby, wide-eyed, offering help. When the boy groaned softly, relief brightened Clara's heart. She made broth from salted venison, hoping to coax him to sip some if he woke up. Hours passed. Night deepened, the ranch house falling quiet, except for the crackle of the fire and the occasional moan from the child as he stirred. Clara stayed by his side, dabbing at his forehead with a cool cloth. She studied his features, the delicate arch of his eyebrows, the high cheekbones, the braids undone by the mud. He looked so young and vulnerable, so different from how many settlers imagined hostile Indians. At some point, after midnight, he opened his eyes. For a moment, confusion clouded them, and he tried to bolt upright. But Clara gently laid a hand on his shoulder, speaking softly. She introduced herself, though she wasn't sure he could understand. He blinked. "Tate," he murmured, voice raspy. She repeated the word gently, not sure if it was his name. He nodded, pressing his hand to his chest. "Tate," he said again. Clara smiled. "Tate, I'm Clara." Slowly, she lifted the steaming cup of broth to his lips. He sipped, wincing at first, then drinking more eagerly. She saw the relief in his eyes, and it filled her with a strange mix of joy and dread. She prayed fervently that he would live through the night. And she also feared what would happen come morning, what others would say, or what his tribe might do if they found him here. In that quiet, flickering firelight, as Tate drifted back into fitful sleep, Clara decided she would protect him at all costs, no matter the challenges that lay ahead. Morning light spilled through the windows, illuminating Tate's resting form. His breathing had steadied during the night, a small but promising sign. Still, Clara knew that infection was a real danger after such trauma. She told old Jim that they had to get Doc Hastings. Saul nodded, heading out for the half-day ride to Pine Creek. Meanwhile, father and daughter went about their daily ranch chores, weaving back into the house every hour to check on Tate. Lucy hovered at the edges, nervous but fascinated by the presence of their Lakota guest. Around noon, the sound of hoofbeats drummed in the yard. Expecting it to be Saul returning, Clara peered through the window. Instead, she saw Deputy Marshal Benjamin Roach and a local rancher, William Jacob Brown, two men known for their unwavering stance that the local tribes should be driven away. Clara's heart seized. "Pa," she hissed, "Roach is here." Old Jim set down his coffee cup and looked out the window, eyes grim. "Stay inside, I'll handle him." But Clara, stubborn as ever, followed her father to the front porch. Deputy Roach tipped his hat slightly, though he wore a stern expression. "Jim," he said curtly. Brown spat a wad of tobacco onto the dirt. "Ben." Old Jim returned, crossing his arms. "What can I do for you?" Deputy Roach cleared his throat. "We're making rounds warning folks. Seems there've been sightings of Lakota around these parts. Rumor has it they might be scouting ranches." He glanced pointedly at the footprints in the dirt near the porch, as though searching for evidence. "You seen anything?" Clara forced her face to remain neutral. For a split second, she worried they could hear the soft rustle inside, the faint moan from Tate as Lucy tended to him. Old Jim's voice was steady. "Haven't seen anything out of the ordinary." Brown squinted at Clara, eyes suspicious. "Folks say the Jacobs are friendly with them Indians, maybe a little too friendly." She bristled, fists clenched at her sides, but old Jim placed a calming hand on her shoulder. "Now that's uncalled for," he said evenly. "We don't pick fights. We work hard and mind our own business. That's all." Roach leaned in, lowering his voice. "Any sign of them, you best let us know. We've got reason to believe they might be after stolen horses. Could be trouble." Clara ground her teeth. She knew that rumors about Indian raids often floated around, fueled by fear and prejudice. But she also knew from her father's example that not all such stories were true or even half-true. Brown spat again, looking past Jim's shoulder at the house. "Better not be harboring one of them in there if the townsfolk found out well." He let the threat linger in the warm autumn air. Something flickered in old Jim's eyes, a protective spark that Clara recognized. But he maintained his calm. "We appreciate the warning. You'll excuse us if we get back to chores now." With a grunt, the men turned their horses and headed down the dusty road. Only when they disappeared around a bend did Clara let out the breath she'd been holding. She rushed inside to find Lucy peeking around the corner, eyes wide as saucers, and Tate lying still on the couch, his eyes now open in silent alarm. "It's all right," Clara whispered to him, kneeling by his side. She gently squeezed his hand, hoping to convey reassurance. If Deputy Roach or William Jacob Brown discovered Tate, the Jacobs family would be in serious trouble. But that was a risk Clara and old Jim seemed willing to take, for reasons that sprang from their hearts more than from logic. That day passed in tense quiet. By evening, Doc Hastings arrived with Saul. The doctor, known for his kindly nature, blinked in surprise at the Lakota boy. But after a meaningful glance at old Jim and Clara, he said nothing about it. "Well then," he murmured, "let's see this young patient." The old doctor examined Tate by lamplight, checking for broken bones, measuring his temperature, and applying salves to to the raw patches of skin. He nodded approvingly when he saw how well Clara had cleaned the mud from Tate's wounds. "He'll need a few days of rest, maybe longer," Hastings said, finally repacking his bag. "Plenty of fluids and keep him warm. He's a lucky boy. Probably wouldn't have made it if you folks hadn't stepped in." Clara's chest swelled with relief. She escorted the doctor outside, glancing around to ensure no curious neighbors were lurking. "Thank you," she whispered. Doc Hastings gave her a small smile. "Jim's an old friend. I won't say a word, but you be careful. Folks round here can be riled." When he rode off, Clara stood alone in the twilight, the wind carrying a faint rustle of tall grass. She shut her eyes, praying silently that the tide of fate would turn kindly for the Jacobs family and for the young boy whose life now rested in their hands. Over the next several days, Tate recovered steadily. He spoke little, whether from lingering weakness or difficulty communicating in English. Still, he seemed to understand more words each day. Lucy, curious and empathetic, began bringing small gifts to him, a carved horse figurine old Jim had whittled years ago, or a handful of wildflowers from the prairie. Tate accepted these with shy gratitude, sometimes gifting Lucy with a bright, solemn smile that lit up his otherwise reserved face. In quiet moments, Clara tried to piece together bits of his story. Through gestures and halting English, she learned that Tate's father was likely an important figure in their band, a man whose name Tate pronounced as Makakae, though Clara wasn't sure of its meaning. She gathered that Tate had wandered away from camp while exploring the creek bed. That was when the quicksand took him. As the autumn wind sharpened, Tate grew strong enough to walk around the ranch, guided by Clara or Lucy. He never strayed far, maybe out of gratitude, or maybe from a lingering fear of being discovered. Old Jim worried incessantly about a run-in with Deputy Roach or Brown, and he warned everyone in the house to keep quiet. If the townsfolk found out, the consequences could be dire. Ranchers in the territory were on a hair trigger ever since rumors spread about conflicts with some bands of Sioux or other tribes, reports that sometimes overshadowed years of peace. Despite these fears, quiet camaraderie flourished inside the Jacobs household. Tate took a liking to the ranch animals. He offered to help Clara feed the chickens and brush the horses, though she suspected it was his way of repaying the family's kindness. In the evenings, as the sun painted the sky in glorious pinks and oranges, Tate would watch Lucy hum lullabies that their mother had once sung. His gaze often strayed to the horizon, as though searching for someone or waiting for the day he could return home. One afternoon, about a week into Tate's recovery, a neighbor named Mary Louise Carmichael dropped by unannounced, bearing homemade apple preserves and an eagerness to gossip. She was a kindly woman in her 60s, but her curiosity could unravel secrets faster than a thief picking a lock. Panicking Clara realized Tate was in the yard, petting Maple near the barn. She hurried outside, intercepting Mary Louise before she could round the corner. Mary Louise, Clara exclaimed, placing herself bodily in the woman's path. "What a surprise!" Mary Louise smiled, adjusting her bonnet. "Afternoon, dear. I brought these preserves. Thought you might want some for the winter." She tried to peer around Clara's shoulder. "Heard some ruckus. Someone new in your yard?" Clara's pulse throbbed. "Oh, you must have seen Saul. He's been out there working on the fence." She lied, attempting a casual laugh. "We've got a broken post or two. You know how it is." The older woman frowned slightly. "Ah, I see. Well, I wanted to check on you and Lucy. With trouble brewing in these parts, a body can never be too safe. Folks say the Lakota are moving around. Some say they're trying to take land back. Clara summoned her best polite expression, though her heart hammered with fear for Tate. "We're fine," she said evenly. "Haven't seen anything unusual." Mary Louise nodded, then glanced toward the barn one more time. "Well, all right. Keep your doors locked at night. I'd hate for anything to happen." After the older woman left, Clara exhaled in relief. Moments later, Tate peered around the side of the barn, wide-eyed. She beckoned him over. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "We just some folks. They might not understand you're our friend." He nodded solemnly, stepping closer. Then he placed a hand over his heart and spoke softly, in Lakota words she did not understand. But the gratitude in his gaze needed no translation. That evening, as the sun sank low, Tate tried to explain, through gestures and scattered English, that once he was well, he would need to return to his people. Clara's stomach twisted at the thought. She knew it was inevitable. She only hoped that the day he left would come peacefully and that it wouldn't bring sorrow for either side. The day came sooner than expected. Tate's strength returned with surprising vigor, and it became clear that he was anxious to return to his family. He tried to convey that he didn't want to bring trouble upon the Jacobs by staying any longer. Old Jim and Clara agreed that the time had come to escort the boy back to wherever his people might be camped. It was risky. Heading straight into Lakota territory could end badly if the tribe assumed the Jacobs had abducted the boy. At the same time, letting Tate wander alone might see him recaptured by Quicksand or by prejudice from hostile settlers. "I'll take him," old Jim finally said, voice low but firm. "I'm an old codger, and they can see I'm no threat. You two stay put." Clara balked. "But Pa—" She glanced at Tate, who stood quietly by, uncertain. "That's final," Jim said. "If I don't come back by nightfall, you bolt the doors and wait for Saul or the doc." Despite her protests, she eventually relented. Early the next morning, Jim saddled up his old reliable gelding, took a second horse for Tate, and set off. For hours, Clara paced the ranch yard like a caged animal, scanning the horizon for signs of their return. Lucy clung to her side, equally anxious. By late afternoon, faint shapes appeared in the distance. 2 riders. Clara sprinted out, relief surging when she recognized her father and Tate approaching. But there was a strange expression on old Jim's face, a mix of relief, exhaustion, and lingering worry. "They're only a few miles out," he said, dismounting stiffly. He gave Tate a gentle pat on the shoulder. "Met up with Tate's father, who calls himself Makachee. And believe me, that man has a presence about him." They were preparing to strike camp. I explained what happened, even tried to show them with gestures. Tate did the rest. "I think they believe us." Clara felt tension drain from her. "So, that's good news?" Old Jim nodded, glancing at Tate. "He wants to stay one more night. Then tomorrow he'll walk back to camp. Something about needing to honor a promise before he leaves." That evening, the family gathered quietly around the supper table. Tate ate with them, grateful for the meal. When dinner finished, he slipped outside, scanning the sky as the first stars winked into view. Something in his posture told Clara he had a purpose. She followed him, stepping carefully over the crisp grass, mindful of the hush that settled over the land. He turned to her, pointed upward at the vast sprawl of constellations overhead, then touched his chest, and finally the ground beneath them. She sensed he was trying to convey something about his connection to the earth and the sky, a bond that transcended language. The moment felt sacred, a stillness in the heart of the Wild West, where 2 people from different worlds found common ground under a shared firmament. In a halting mixture of English and Lakota, he said something that sounded like, "I not forget. Friend. Always." Tears burned at the corners of her eyes. She nodded, unable to speak. There in the silence of the starlit night, they forged a bond that nothing, no prejudice, no distance could ever truly break. At dawn, Tate departed. Old Jim offered to ride with him, but Tate insisted on walking alone, a testament to his regained strength. Before he left, Lucy gifted him the small wooden horse figurine, pressing it into his hand with a shy smile. He bowed his head in thanks. Clara walked him out to the edge of the ranch property. Her throat felt tight, an ache she couldn't articulate. She remembered the day she pulled him from Quicksand, how he was on the brink of death. Now he stood tall, a young Lakota boy, on the threshold of manhood. The horizon seemed to welcome him home. Tate, she whispered, placing a hand on his shoulder. Safe journey. He gave her a solemn nod, pressed the wooden horse to his heart, and then turned to stride away. Clara stood there for a long time, watching his small figure diminish until it was swallowed by the sea of grass. Only then did she realize how the morning sun glinted off tears on her cheeks. Life returned to a semblance of normal in the following weeks, except for the creeping worry that Deputy Roche or someone else might learn what had happened. And in the swirl of chores and harsh frontier living, a part of Clara wondered if she'd ever see Tate or his people again. Autumn gave way to the icy grip of winter. Snow blanketed the prairie in silent, white drifts. The Jacobs Ranch hunkered down, rationing supplies, tending animals, and waiting for the first thaw of spring. In quiet moments, Clara's mind drifted to that starlit night, to the bond she'd formed with a boy she barely knew yet understood deeply. Meanwhile, Deputy Roche and William Jacob Brown stirred the pot in town. They whispered about upcoming raids, scolded ranchers for leniency toward Indians, and painted nightmares of stolen horses and vandalized barns. Old Jim shook his head at their rumors, but worry took root in Clara's chest. She knew that fear and men like Roach could cause violence to erupt from nothing more than a rumor. Occasionally, word reached them of sightings of small Lakota or Dakota camps. Some friendly ranchers insisted they saw no threat. Others claimed stolen livestock. The lines of tension grew sharper. Through it all, winter sealed the land under ice and snow, as though nature demanded a time of forced stillness. Come the first hint of spring, the grey skies slowly brightened. Meltwater trickled, turning patches of the land to soggy mire. The Jacobs prepared for calving season, patching fences, repairing the barn roof. On a cold, windy dawn in early April, Clara woke to the sound of a horse whinnying in alarm. She sprang from her bed, heart pounding. Peering out the window, she saw Lucy in the yard, staring westward with eyes like saucers. Clara's pulse skipped. She rushed outside, nearly tripping on the porch steps in her haste. "What is it?" she demanded, breath steaming in the crisp air. Lucy, trembling, pointed, "Look." At first, Clara saw nothing but the rolling plains. Then she noticed a long, winding line of figures approaching, men, women, horses. Travois loaded with something. It stretched across the horizon, an unmistakable caravan heading directly toward the Jacobs Ranch. Clara's heart raced. She feared the worst, that a Lakota war party had come outraged to exact vengeance for some perceived wrong. She bolted inside to fetch her father. Old Jim came out, rifle in hand, but not raised caution in his eyes. The line drew closer. It was a procession of Lakota families. At least 40 Travois trailed behind their sturdy ponies, each laden with bundles and items covered under hide or cloth. Leading the way was a tall man, wearing regalia that hinted at leadership. By his side, a teenager who looked familiar, Tate, though taller, more confident. Clara gasped, tears of disbelief welling up. This was not a war party. It was an entourage, and from the looks on their faces, they carried no hostility. Tate lifted his hand in greeting, and Clara felt her heart soar. Slowly, carefully, the Jacobs family moved forward to meet the Lakota group. Old Jim held his rifle across his arm in a non-threatening manner, but anxiety radiated from him. He hadn't forgotten how quickly misunderstandings could spiral. Yet the Lakota man at the front, whom Clara recognized from her father's description as Makakai, wore a solemn, respectful expression. Tate stepped ahead, chest rising with a deep breath. "Clara," he said, voice more assured in English than she remembered. Overjoyed, she placed a hand over her heart. "Tate, you're back." He glanced at his father, then back at Clara. He drew himself tall and addressed old Jim. "My father greets you," he said, haltingly carefully. "We bring gifts. Gratitude for saving me." Clara's gaze swept over the Travois, each heavy with goods, hides, pelts, finely crafted blankets, dried meats, intricate beadwork. The sheer generosity took her breath away. 40 Travois, she had never seen anything like it. Makachai spoke in Lakota, his voice carrying a melodic authority that hushed the wind. Tate translated, though sometimes stumbling. "He says, you saved his son, his only boy, for that our band is in your debt. He said, a life saved is a life bound. He brings these gifts and his blessing. Overcome." Old Jim lowered his rifle entirely, stepping forward with tears in his eyes. "We never expected anything like this. We only did what was right." Makachie nodded once. His gaze flicked to Clara. He stepped closer and spoke in broken English, each word weighted with sincerity. "Father must thank father, but also thank daughter." He pointed gently at Clara. "Daughter is brave." Clara felt heat flush her cheeks. She bowed her head, slightly unsure of what to say. Then the Lakota families began unfastening the bundles from the Travois, arranging them in neat piles before the Jacobs family. The scene was surreal, an outpouring of thanks so immense it seemed to span the entire yard. Wordlessly, Lucy joined Clara, tears in her wide eyes. The weight of the gifts and the significance of this moment were almost too much to comprehend. Neighbors soon took notice. One by one, ranchers and homesteaders rode up, curiosity inflamed by the presence of such a large Lakota gathering. Clara stiffened, fear lancing through her. She spotted Deputy Roach and William Jacob Brown among them, cantering up on horseback. Their expressions were thunderous with suspicion. Makachai must have noticed the shift in atmosphere. He signaled his people to remain calm. Old Jim took a step forward, facing the crowd of gawking onlookers. Deputy Roach dismounted, hand hovering near his revolver. "What's going on here?" Roach barked, his voice echoing across the yard. Clara inhaled sharply. She realized in that moment more than ever how delicate the situation was. One spark of misunderstanding could set off violence. But she also sensed a resolve blossoming within her. She would not let fear drown out what was right. Old Jim motioned for silence. He spoke in a clear, steady tone, addressing Roach Brown and the gathering neighbors. "These people have come in peace." He gestured to the piles of gifts shimmering in the midday sun. "They're here to thank us for saving a boy from Quicksand last fall. He's standing here alive because my daughter risked her neck." Brown spat on the ground, a scowl twisting his mouth. "They say one thing, but how do we know they won't turn on us tomorrow?" A few murmurs of agreement spread through the crowd. Roach's gaze flickered warily between the Jacobs family and the Lakota. "We've had rumors of stolen horses. We can't just ignore that." Clara's heart pounded as she stepped forward. She refused to let hate and suspicion overshadow the truth. "You all know us," she said, voice trembling but firm. "The Jacob's name stands for honesty. We have never lied to any of you, nor caused trouble. If we say these people come in peace, why wouldn't you trust us?" The onlookers shuffled uneasily. Among them were a few ranchers who had shared a cordial relationship with old Jim. In the past, men and women who respected the Jacobs enough to consider their word. Others, more hardline, frowned in distrust. The tension hovered like a hot wire. Behind Clara, Tate clenched his fists, clearly wanting to defend his people. Makakie spoke a few words in Lakota to his son, who nodded. Tate then addressed the crowd. "We come to thank Jacobs for saving my life. We bring these gifts, so you see, we are not enemies." He paused, trying to gather the right English words. "My father, my family do not want war. We want peace." Deputy Roach's eyebrows lowered. The possibility of a quiet resolution seemed to war with the fear ingrained in him. Brown, on the other hand, glowered. "They speak with forked tongues," he muttered. "Next thing we know, they'll set our barns on fire." At that, a tall rancher named Amos Taylor, who had previously been close friends with old Jim, spoke up. "Now hold on, Brown. The Jacobs are no fools. If they vouch for these folks, I'm inclined to believe them. We all heard how Clara saved that boy." A murmur rippled through the crowd. The story of Clara's rescue had quietly spread among friends, though perhaps many dismissed it as rumor or a tall tale. Now faced with the living evidence of a Lakota boy, it was impossible to deny. Brown sputtered, "Don't tell me you're convinced by some puppy dog eyes and a pile of skins," but his voice lacked the iron conviction it had earlier. The presence of so many gifts and the calm dignity of the Lakota spoke volumes. Old Jim gently rested a hand on Brown's shoulder. "William, we've known each other a long time. You know me. I'd never do anything that'd endanger this community. Believe me, there's no trick here." Brown, cornered by reason, and the shifting mood of the crowd, huffed angrily and backed away. Deputy Roach, still wary, seemed to soften slightly, though his posture remained tense. In the hush that followed, Makachaye turned to Clara, placed his hand over his heart, and spoke in a gentle, resonant voice. He then reached for one of the most ornate blankets from the Travois, its pattern woven in bright geometric shapes, and draped it softly around Clara's shoulders. Tate translated quietly, he says, "This is for your bravery and kindness. May you always be wrapped in warmth and good fortune." Eyes brimming with tears, Clara touched the blanket reverently. She glanced at the crowd. Many watched with awe, and a hint of shame flickered across their faces as they saw the sincere gratitude behind the Lakota's gesture. Wariness still lingered, but an opening had appeared, an opening to see each other's humanity. From that moment, the Jacobs Ranch became the scene of an unexpected gathering. The Lakota families set up a temporary camp not far from the barn, cooking food, tending their horses, and sharing quiet conversation. Some neighboring ranchers rode away, still uneasy, while others stayed to observe. Curiosity and a hesitant sense of possibility hung in the air. For the next day or two, visitors trickled in, some from the nearby homesteads, some from as far as Pine Creek. Doc Hastings, hearing the commotion, arrived to find the yard teeming with Lakota families offering gifts, singing songs, and performing small rituals of gratitude. He was stunned, but quickly became enthralled by the cultural exchange unfolding before his eyes. Slowly, the Jacobs introduced their neighbors to the Lakota in a spirit of openness. Lucy, with her childlike innocence, giggled with Lakota girls over shared treats. She showed them how to feed chickens while they taught her a few words in their language. Old Jim and Makachi, two men of different worlds, spoke through Tate, bridging the language barrier to discuss everything from horse rearing to the fickle nature of the weather. Some ranchers, like Amos Taylor, began trading goods, exchanging dried corn or wheat for Lakota beadwork. Others, more suspicious, hovered at the edges, arms folded, scowling. But the seeds of understanding had been planted. The presence of 40 Travois laden with gifts was a sight few would forget. It was an unprecedented gesture of respect and goodwill that challenged the easy narratives of hostile Indians repeated in town. Deputy Roach maintained a watchful presence. He even escorted Colonel Robert Nicholson, a local official who had come to see what was happening. Nicholson was a wiry man with a sharp gaze, cautious yet open to reason. After careful observation and a long discussion with old Jim Nicholson, concluded that this was no threat, just a sincere act of thanks. Throughout it all, Clara felt her heart swell with a mix of pride, relief, and hope. She and Tate spent many hours talking him practicing English, her stumbling through a few Lakota phrases he shared. She learned about his mother, who wove blankets with patterns that told stories of their ancestors. He learned that her mother had died, leaving an emptiness she tried to fill with everyday tasks. In between these moments of kinship, the brutal reality of the frontier still pressed at the edges. Deputy Roach insisted that the Lakota's presence must be temporary. The townsfolk, he said, wouldn't tolerate a long-term camp so close to settlements. Makachie nodded in understanding. The band was en route to a traditional gathering place for the warmer months, and they needed to continue their journey eventually. But before leaving, they wanted to ensure the Jacobs knew the depth of their gratitude. Tate explained that his father planned a small ceremony to honor Clara's act of saving Tate from certain death. It would be held the following evening at sunset. As dusk approached the next day, the Lakota lit small fires in a circle near the ranch house. The fading sun cast ribbons of gold and purple across the sky, and the air was thick with anticipation. Curious neighbors gathered at a respectful distance, the hush of the moment turning them into silent observers. Clara stood beside old Jim, nerves fluttering. She had never been part of such a ceremony, and she worried about intruding on something so sacred. But Tate assured her that her presence was essential. This ceremony was about recognizing the life-saving bond forged that autumn day. Makachie stepped into the center of the circle, carrying a small bundle. He spoke a few words in Lakota, and Tate translated for the Jacobs and the onlookers. He says, "This is the Wichasha Wakang, a ceremony. He calls the one who saved me a sister to our people." A ripple of awe went through the gathering. Makachie drew out a beautifully beaded necklace from the bundle. Intricate patterns of red, yellow, and white glimmered in the firelight. He approached Clara with deliberate reverence and placed the necklace gently around her neck. Tate's voice trembled slightly as he translated his father's words. He says, "When she found my son, she gave him life. This necklace is a sign that she is part of our circle now." Clara's eyes brimmed with tears. She barely breathed as the weight of the necklace settled on her collarbone, its beads clinking softly. The air crackled with an electric hush. Then, as if signaled by an unseen cue, several Lakota men and women began a low chant. The melody was ancient and powerful, sending vibrations through Clara's chest. The circle of onlookers watched in silent reverence. Some teary-eyed, others touched by a sense of unity they never thought possible. Even Deputy Roach, standing near his horse, appeared moved, though he tried to hide it behind a stoic expression. As the chanting rose, Tate stepped forward. He took Clara's hands in his. "You saved me," he said softly, the flickering firelight dancing in his dark eyes. "I will always remember." In that moment, The tension, fear, and prejudice that so often plagued the frontier seemed to melt away, leaving only the raw human truth. Compassion knows no boundary of race or creed. For once, the Great Plains sang a song of unity. The Lakota spent another 2 days at the Jacobs Ranch, during which the climate of the entire settlement seemed to shift. While many overcame their misgivings, a persistent handful still grumbled about Indians on the ranch. Some vocal residents, spurred on by William Jacob Brown's bitterness, pressed Deputy Roach to order the Lakota off the land sooner. But Roach, perhaps tempered by the ceremony, recognized the goodwill at play. He gave Makachaye and his people the leeway to stay until they were ready to depart peacefully. By the time the Lakota caravan prepared to move on, something remarkable had happened. A seed of mutual respect had taken root in the hearts of many. A few ranchers who initially eyed the Lakota with mistrust now offered small gestures of friendship, exchanging goods, sharing a pipe, or simply talking about the land they all inhabited. On the morning of their departure, Lucy found herself weeping as she hugged the Lakota girls goodbye. The families loaded their gifts and supplies back onto the Travois, though they left many items with the Jacobs as tokens of friendship. Tate said his farewells, promising to return when the season changed again. As Clara embraced him one last time, a bittersweet pang tugged at her. She realized how uncertain life could be. One day, you are saving a boy from quicksand. The next day, you are standing in a circle of fires, receiving an honor you never dreamed of. And tomorrow was always a question mark. The caravan stretched out across the plains, once more colorful in the morning light. Clara and her family stood watching until they were distant specks on the horizon, then gone. A hush settled over the ranch yard. It was as though a grand event had just concluded, leaving behind an afterglow of wonder and the realization that life would never be the same. That evening, while clearing a small stash of the Lakota gifts, Lucy discovered a carefully folded piece of parchment with simple drawings upon it. It showed a figure pulling another from the mud, and above it, the symbols of the sun and sky. Beneath it, in shaky English, was a message, "We remember." Clara pressed it to her chest, a swell of emotions rushing over her. "They remember," she thought, feeling an inexplicable lump in her throat. So will I. Though the Lakota had left the story of their visit, and the spectacle of 40 Travois loaded with gifts spread quickly through the region. Travelers, trappers, and peddlers carried the tale far and wide, each recounting the improbable friendship sparked by a single act of compassion. Some folks reacted with wonder, believing it a sign of possible harmony between settlers and native tribes. Others scoffed, insisting it was a fluke or part of some cunning ruse. Deputy Roach faced pressure to quell any uprisings, while Colonel Nicholson quietly worked behind the scenes, noting that friendly relations might actually help avoid conflict and spare the territory from bloodshed. The Jacobs Ranch found itself a reluctant center of attention. Reporters from small newspapers tried to interview old Jim or Clara, seeking a sensational story of the heroic ranch girl who befriended the savages. Clara bristled at their language, but she and her father told the truth. It was about saving a child, not about politics. Meanwhile, William Jacob Brown nursed a grudge, publicly deriding the Jacobs as too trusting and blaming them whenever rumors circulated of stolen livestock or skirmishes elsewhere. Yet over time, the weight of the Lakota's peace gesture could not be ignored. More and more ranchers quietly reached out to local tribal members, forging trade or simply exchanging words. A fragile, tenuous bridge began to form. In the midst of all this, Clara continued her daily tasks, feeding livestock, mending fences, helping Lucy with schooling. She wore the beaded necklace from the ceremony beneath her shirt. Most days, its presence a reminder of deeper truths that the endless chores could not erase. Sporadically, news arrived from travelers who had encountered the Lakota band, hearing them speak of the Jacobs with fondness. One such traveler claimed that Tate referred to Clara as Hate Chang Te or Wind Heart, though the traveler wasn't sure of the exact translation. Another described how Makachie proudly displayed the wooden horse Lucy had given Tate, retelling the rescue story at campfires. Each new snippet of information tugged at Clara's heart. She felt a longing to see them all again, though she knew the plains were vast and the future uncertain. Still, she found solace in the knowledge that somewhere out there, those she called friends roamed free across the land. Life proceeded peacefully for the remainder of that spring until an early summer afternoon brought a harsh reminder that not everyone embraced peace. Amos Taylor, the friendly rancher, who had supported the Jacobs, rode into the yard at breakneck speed, face pale with worry. "Jim," he cried, stumbling off his horse. "They're back, Brown, and some men. They're riding to flush out a group of Lakota they heard were passing near Pine Creek. They're spoiling for a fight. If there's truth to it, it might be Tate's band." Alarm jolted Clara. She and old Jim saddled their horses at once. Lucy, tears in her eyes, begged to come, but old Jim refused, insisting she stay behind with Saul to guard the ranch. Clara rode alongside her father and Amos Dust, kicking up behind them as they raced toward Pine Creek. As they neared the outskirts, they saw a plume of smoke in the distance. A cold, sick feeling churned in Clara's gut. She urged Maple faster. The smell of burning wood stung her nostrils, and soon they found themselves at the edge of a scorched patch of land where a small Lakota camp had clearly been. The remnants of teepee poles lay scattered, fires hastily stamped out, belongings left behind in panic. Clara's heart hammered. "They attacked them," she cried, scanning the area for survivors. Amos shook his head. "Looks like they fled before Brown's men arrived." "Thank the Lord." But Brown torched whatever was left. Old Jim seethed with anger, face darkening like a thunderhead. For what fear, hatred? Damn fools! They searched the area, finding no bodies, only the remnants of a hurried evacuation. Anxiety gnawed at Clara. Could Tate and his family be among those fleeing? Suddenly, hoofbeats thundered. Clara turned to see Deputy Roach, accompanied by half a dozen men, including William Jacob Brown. They approached with rifles slung across their saddles, the acrid smell of smoke clinging to them. Brown's face twisted in a sneer. "Well, Jacob's come to help your pet Indians?" Old Jim snarled. "Burning camps now. That's how you keep the peace." Deputy Roach, looking grim, intervened. "We had orders to investigate suspicious activity. The Lakota were gone when we arrived. A warning shot must have spooked them, and they set a fire, or it was an accident." "Accident, my hide," Amos roared. "You're out for blood." Brown bristled, jabbing a finger at Amos. "Keep your mouth shut, traitor. I won't have these savages lurking near my ranch." Clara's anger flared. She faced the men, chest tight. "These people are family's children. They're not outlaws. You saw the gifts they brought to us. They only want peace." Brown spat on the ground. "Peace means nothing if they think they can claim our land. Best they learn who's in charge." Hot tears pricked Clara's eyes, but she wouldn't show weakness. "The Great Plains belong to no one, man," she whispered fiercely, echoing a concept she had heard from Tate. "And you have no right to burn their homes." A tense standoff formed, broken only by Deputy Roach clearing his throat. "The group's gone. No one was killed. Let's keep our heads. This matter's done." His tone suggested he didn't fully believe his own words, but he wanted to avoid escalation. Brown snorted, jerking his horse around. We'll see if it's done." He galloped off his men, trailing behind. The swirl of dust they kicked up felt like an ominous warning. Clara dismounted, scanning the abandoned camp for any sign of Tate. She found none, only footprints and scattered possessions. Kneeling by a small, half-burned blanket, she traced its embroidered pattern with trembling fingers. A wave of sorrow hit her, mingled with fury, at the senseless cruelty she had just witnessed. Old Jim placed a hand on her shoulder. "We'll find them if we can. Let's search a bit longer." They combed the area until dusk, but found no trace of the Lakota families who had wisely fled. With heavy hearts, they returned to the Jacobs Ranch, praying that Tate and his people had escaped unharmed. The days that followed were restless. Rumors surged. William Jacob Brown was rallying a patrol to flush out Lakota families near Pine Creek. Town tension reached a boil, with ranchers either aligning with Brown or cautiously backing away. Clara barely slept. She couldn't forget the unity she had witnessed, the warmth of Tate's people, the promise of peace. But now it all seemed to hang by a thread. Then one crisp morning, Clara spotted a lone rider approaching the ranch. Her heart skipped. It was Tate. She raced outside. "Tate, you're safe," he nodded, face lined with worry. "But we run again and again. Brown chases. My father says, we must go beyond the river to family. But we need supplies." Old Jim joined them, voice steady. "You'll have what you need. Food, blankets, whatever we can spare." That night, they prepared under cover of darkness: flour, dried meat, coffee, blankets, essentials for the journey west. Clara and Lucy worked quietly, while Tate helped despite his exhaustion. By dawn, the wagon rolled out toward a wooded ravine. Every sound along the trail set Clara's nerves on edge, but they reached the camp safely. There, they found Makache and the others weary and displaced. Old Jim and Makache embraced silently, a moment beyond words. Lucy handed shawls and dolls to Lakota children. The Lakota tried to give gifts again, but the Jacobs refused. This was not about repayment. As they prepared to leave, Tate held Clara's arm. "I wish I could repay." "You already have," she said, holding back tears. She felt the necklace beneath her coat, their bond enduring. Through Tate, Makache offered a final message. Our hearts traveled together. The Jacobs returned home. Clara watched the Lakota fade into the prairie, uncertain if they'd meet again, but knowing the thread that connected them would never break. Summer settled over the plains, and tensions slowly eased. Brown's patrols fizzled out. His men never found the Lakota who had likely crossed the Missouri. Whispers persisted, but violence never returned. At the Jacobs Ranch, life resumed its rhythm. Fences needed mending, cattle tending, and settlers whispered of the railroad pushing west. But something had shifted forever. Clara often paused at Sunset Eyes, scanning the horizon. Though the Lakota caravan didn't return that year or the next, word trickled in. Traders spoke of a young man named Tate who called Clara the sister who saved me. The name warmed her heart. Then, one golden autumn day, a group of riders approached. Clara stepped outside. Breath-catching, Tate had returned, older, stronger, smiling wide. They shared news gifts, laughter. Clara realized the rope she threw into the quicksand had woven a bond that distance couldn't sever. Each year after Tate's people returned, slowly bridging a cultural chasm. The legend of the 40 Travois lived on, a testament to how compassion can echo far beyond a single act. On a once divided prairie, two worlds learned to walk side by side, and a brave girl's kindness transformed a region forever. In the end, Clara's simple decision to toss a rope into a pit of quicksand transcended every boundary placed by fear, hate, and doubt. It became the catalyst for a bond between two worlds that few thought possible. The sight of those 40 Travois rolling in, with offerings, furs, blankets, and heartfelt thanks, remained etched in every settler's mind, long after the wagons moved on. Through harvest seasons and bitter winters, people recalled how friendship born of empathy survived in a land that often drove them apart. If this story stirred your heart, please share it far and wide. Let others see how a single act of kindness can echo through time, bridging gaps we once believed impossible to cross. Like, share, and subscribe to keep these powerful, true-to-life stories alive. Reminders that even on the harsh frontier of life, hope and humanity can still prevail.